And these are 8 what I call reliable warm season crops that you can replant in the fall. What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having a fantastic day. It is Friday, August 2nd here in South Georgia, and on today's video we're going to talk about 8 warm season veggies that most of you can replant right now for a fall harvest, and then we're going to look at some of the fall stuff we have planted right here behind me, do a little maintenance on some of that. So now that we're in August, we're in what I call the short rows of summer. Still have a decent amount of brutal heat to deal with, but we're kind of on the back end of it. And I'll be honest with you, there are a lot of years where I just dread August around here and can't wait for fall to come around. But this year it hasn't really been too bad. There's been a couple short stretches where the heat index has got up there, you know, around 110 or so. But generally, it hasn't been as hot as it can be. So over the next few videos, we're going to be focusing on fall planting, obviously talking about warm season veggies to replant in the fall on this video, and then we'll be talking about cool season stuff on a video later this week. And just to note here, we do have a lot of the cool season seeds you'll see us growing on our website now at lazydogfarm.com, so you can check those out. So let's get into our list of 8 here, and these are 8 what I call reliable warm season crops that you can replant in the fall. Yes, we are trying fall tomatoes this year for the first time, but I'm not putting those on this list because I don't consider that something really reliable. These are 8 things that I've grown many times in the fall that I know you can grow and get a decent harvest from. So number 1 would be bush beans. That could be bush green beans, bush lima beans, bush butter peas, any kind of bush beans like that you can replant in the fall and usually get a nice little harvest. May even get enough to can some or put some in the freezer. Number 2 would be pole beans. This would include pole green beans and pole lima beans. We'll be planting some pole lima beans pretty soon on our arch panel trellis back there, and hopefully getting enough to put in the freezer. Those always do great for me in the fall. Number 3 would be cow peas, aka field peas. A lot of different cow pea varieties out there. Due to our pest pressure down here, those tend to do better for us in the fall than when planted in the spring. And I think on the next video we're going to be planting 2 or 3 different varieties of cow peas in a plot over there, so stay tuned for that. And then number 4, you've got sweet corn. I've grown sweet corn in the fall many times. Haven't done it in several years, but it's pretty easy to do. The worm pressure is a little higher, and you might want to choose one of the sweeter varieties that have a faster maturity date, just depending on how much time you have. But growing sweet corn in the fall isn't that difficult at all. And then number 5 would be summer squash. We actually have a fall round of summer squash planted right behind me here. If it's still pretty hot where you live, you may want to pick a variety that has some disease resistance, like the grand prize we have growing behind me here, that can take the heat until it cools off a little bit. But once it cools off, the pest pressure and disease pressure should subside a little bit, and you should get some nice squash. And then number 6 would be cucumbers, which we also have growing right here behind me. Kind of the same deal with the summer squash. If it's still pretty hot where you live, you may want to pick a variety that has some disease resistance that can kind of make it through that last stretch of summer, and then you should get some really nice production going into fall. Number 7 would be okra. I've grown fall okra many times. Probably not going to do it this year because we got our first planting of okra planted kind of late and it's just now starting to produce. But you can do okra in the fall if you've got plenty of time. Don't just look at the maturity date on the seed packet though. Consider you're probably going to want at least a month there of good harvest from it. So take that maturity date, maybe add 30 days or so onto that and see if you've got enough time. If you do, fall okra is a great idea. And then the last one, number 8, would be winter squash or pumpkins. We actually have some giant butternut squash growing here behind me that I'll show you in a minute. We covered this on a previous video. If you live in an area where it's still kind of hot, you probably want to focus on those machata types, the butternuts, the Seminole pumpkins, maybe even the Cherokee tan pumpkins. Those tend to do a lot better planted in the fall than say jack-o'-lanterns or even the kabocha type squash. You're going to need about 100 days, so make sure you've got plenty of time there to work with. So those are my 8 reliable warm season crops that you can replant in the fall. Some of you can replant all of those. Some of you may not have enough time for some of those and can only get away with the shorter maturing stuff, say like summer squash or cucumbers. But at least you know the wide range of stuff that you can replant in the fall. You just got to see if you got enough time. Now let's take a look at some of this stuff we have growing right here behind me, and just ignore all the weeds. It's rained almost every afternoon for the last couple weeks, so I've had a little bit of a time keeping up with the weeds. So let's start out with our giant butternut squash here. We originally planted about 9 transplants along this 30-foot row because that's what we had, and then we thinned them out to about 4 transplants. That's what you see now. So these are looking pretty good considering the fact that it still is August around here. For some reason this plant has a different leaf pattern than the rest of them. Not really sure what's going on there. We may get some odd looking fruits out here, but only time will tell. And now that these things have started crawling and sprawling quite a bit, I am going to have to direct these vines a little bit. You can see that vine right there is wanting to run out the plot, so I need to turn it a little bit. I've already turned some of those others to grow out into this open space we have here. Now, as I told you when we planted these giant butternut squash, if you're trying to grow a massive one, you can prune these vines and prune the fruits, only leave 1 fruit per plant, and really try to grow a monster. I'm not trying to grow a record this year. We're just trying to get some nice sized fruits to eat. So I'm just gonna let my plants grow and just kind of train them around this plot so they don't get cut by the lawnmower. Now we have fed these well, and we'll continue to feed them well with some Coop Grow and AgriThrive. And it's not a bad idea to not only feed them at the base of the plant where kind of the main stump is, but also feed them along that main leader there. So that main leader you see will put down roots wherever it ends up going, and if I can find it and get to it easily, I like to pour or spread some fertilizer along it as well to kind of feed the entire plant, not just right there at the stump. Now if we skip over all those weeds there, right here in this row we've got our 4th planting of summer squash, and these were looking a lot better about a week and a half ago before we started getting so much rain. They've started looking a little rough since. Not sure if I can get them to grow out of it or not. I still have time to plant some more, and another spot we'll just see what happens with these. They appear to be getting a decent amount of pest pressure on them right now. And then lastly, we've got our 2nd planting of cucumbers right here. We've got 2 different varieties. We've got the Supremo up there on the top half of the row, and then Katrina right here on the bottom half of the row. For whatever reason, the Katrina is growing a lot faster than Supremo is, but both of them are looking pretty decent. They were a little slow to get up and going, but they're looking really good now, and the pests don't seem to be bothering these as much as they are that squash. Now, as you can see there, we are way past due getting a trellis up for these cucumbers, especially for those Katrina cucumbers. Kind of wanted to wait and see how they did and make sure they didn't get taken down by pests before I took the effort to put up a trellis, but we definitely need to do that today. Now, in addition to putting up a trellis for these Katrina cucumber plants here, I'm also going to thin them out a little bit. One thing I learned with that earlier planting of this variety is that I don't need to overcrowd the plants, even though we're growing these vertically. These plants are so vigorous, they almost get overcrowded, and there's not enough trellis space for all the vines. So I'm probably going to thin these out to maybe just 4 plants or so. That will be a plenty as productive as this variety is. And another thing I learned with that first planting is that I need a much taller trellis. So as opposed to using 5-foot T-posts, I'm going to find the biggest T-post I've got, or the tallest T-post I've got underneath the barn. I'll get that trellis set up with a conduit, much like we did the first planting, and I'll show you what it looks like. All right, so obviously a much taller structure than what we were working with on our first round of Katrina cucumbers. These T-posts here are about 7.5, 8 foot tall. And if you want a really good workout, drive you some 8-foot T-posts into the ground. I'm 6'1", and it's all I can do to reach my T-post driver on top of those posts there and get them in the ground without having to go grab a stool. I have to stab them in the ground real good, and then I can barely get the driver on top of them, and you'll work some muscles you didn't even know you had. So some of you have seen this structure before, maybe some of you haven't, so I'll go over it real quick. So we've got 3 T-posts in the ground. We've got a little 10-foot span here. We've got a 10-foot long piece of conduit. We've got some PVC fittings up here, elbows on the ends, and then a T in the middle. And we put our posts on the end just inside 10 foot because we want that piece of conduit to fit real snug. We don't want the wind blowing this thing out of the socket. And then as far as the meat of the trellis goes, we use the Hortonova trellis netting. You can see my roll of that over there on the ground. So I just cut it to length, and then I use zip ties to attach it to the top and to the post there, trying to get it as tight as I can. Now, because this one is so tall, my Hortonova netting doesn't go all the way to the ground. So those 2 plants right there aren't quite tall enough to weave on the trellis yet, but they will be before too long. Now, besides the taller post, another thing I did different here is I pruned those cucumber plants. I've never pruned cucumber plants, but I know they can be pruned. This Katrina variety here, I think, was actually designed for greenhouse production, so it probably does well when it is pruned. And I wanted to kind of get these plants off the ground a little bit. I noticed with that first round of Katrinas that we grew, I got a lot of my cucumbers on the ground there. So I pruned some of that bottom growth, trying to get more of my production on the trellis as opposed to on the ground. So we didn't cut off a whole lot there, just probably 3 or 4 nodes at the bottom. Also made it a little easier to weave those taller plants into our trellis netting here. You can also see I thinned those out a little bit. I think I pulled 3 or 4 plants out of there. Thin them out, give them a little more space to do what they need to do. Also should make it easier for me to kind of control the pests in here. You get too much foliage and sometimes the pests just have a nice little haven to do some damage. So we'll see how those grow. Hopefully we didn't do any damage by pruning them. Probably not going to prune them anymore once I get them on the trellis. Just going to let them grow and do their thing. And barring a hurricane or a tropical storm, which we are very liable to get this time of year, I think we're going to have a pretty decent grow out of fall cucumbers there. So I hope you enjoyed the video today, and hopefully you're able to squeeze in a few more warm season crops for fall planting. Don't forget, you can find a lot of the seeds we grow around here on our website at lazydogfarm.com. And if you want to see a more step-by-step installation of that cucumber trellis, watch this video we did on our first round of cucumbers this year. We'll kind of break it down step by step, showing you how to put that all together. So check that out, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.